Okay, good to go. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Crypto Policy Symposium. This is a session on cryptopias, the physical and virtual utopian environments that are being built by crypto acolytes and what we make of them. I'm Emily Nicole, I'm crypto blogger at Bloomberg News, and I'm joined today by a really stellar panel of guests, but I'll let them introduce themselves. David, why don't you give a head start?
I'm David Gerard, crypto skeptical journalist. I write the blog Attack of the Fifth Blockchain, and I wrote the book of the same name.
Great. And Molly, how about you?
I'm Molly White. I'm a software engineer and I run the blog Web3 is Going Just Great, which is a crypto skeptical blog about Web3 and everything crypto.
And Oscar.
Hi everyone, my name is Oscar Salguaro. I am a Salvadoran immigrant living in the United States, and I am also, a software engineer with experience building apps. Thank you for having me.
So obviously, I think the biggest topic at the front of everyone's minds when we talk about a crypto utopia is the one that's been in the news, and that is in El Salvador, Oscar, where you are based right now. Can you tell us a bit more about what El Salvador is trying to do and what progress you've seen towards that so far?
Sure thing. It's been 1 year since the Bitcoin law became, a law of the nation in El Salvador. And with this law, what the president wanted to do then was to bring Bitcoin in pair with the US dollar, which was our currency for the last 20 years, and make it a legal tender. He also wanted to bring innovative crypto companies into El Salvador to generate, employment in technology, and wanted to somehow detach El Salvador from the traditional financial system where developing countries need to touch the doors of the IMF and the World Bank, etc., to finance a lot of the things that the government needs to finance in 1 year to make it work and develop social programs and whatnot. So among other things, right? And obviously the most famous projects like Bitcoin City that also have been offered.
And how well is that going so far at the minute?
Yeah, so far, I've been visiting El Salvador a lot, and I was at the Bitcoin City airport build place, or where it's going to be built at someday, like a couple of weeks ago, and there's nothing. There's no, there's no ground broken. There's no like first stone laid or something like that yet. So yeah, I guess that because the Bitcoin bonds were delayed, and that was like a big part of the funding to start building Bitcoin City and the connected projects such as the thermal plant to generate electricity and the airport, none of that has been built so far.
And David, this isn't the first time that we've seen a country try and build this kind of crypto utopia. Like, we do have a precedent here, right? Puerto Rico's been trying this for several years. What do you think we've learned from that this time around? Is this even a possible thing to do?
So Puerto Rico hasn't been trying to do it. Various big crypto guys have come to Puerto Rico and tried to do it to Puerto Rico, which is a different thing. What we've seen is they tried really hard in early to mid 2018 off the tail end of the 2017 Bitcoin bubble. Then those efforts sort of fell by the wayside because the money ran out, and the locals really, really hated them. They didn't like these guys moving in and trying to more or less run a tax scam on the Puerto Rican public. I mean, using particular legal get-outs, tax minimization schemes, let's say. They basically got no traction locally. Then they went away for a few years, and then they came back in late 2021, early 2022, in this Bitcoin bubble. Basically, they had a lot of money and they thought, we can use it to develop a environment which will work well for the right people, that is, rich guys who don't like regulations on how they swing their money around. That's what this was all about. But I mean, these these sort of things have been a common pitch to, well, I'd say naive investors who are libertarians. They're a common target of people trying to sell you scams. I call it the Galt's Gulch scam, named after the utopia in Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, where all the rich guys got sick of the moochers and loafers and went off to make their own little town where they could live in individualistic joy, apparently with no one doing the work. These schemes worked about as well as the book version would have. In most cases, they were simply investment scams, usually targeting American investors, even if the organizations themselves were selling, say, land in Chile or on an island in the Pacific somewhere, where they claimed that you wouldn't be subject to all those annoying laws and regulations and so on, and your money could just live its best life freely. And they never built the stuff, and they took everyone's money and disappeared. And this was particularly effective when it was in crypto, because, you know, the money was much less traceable. So this is both a foolish dream, an unfortunate thing for any locals who get in the way of the rich guys' plans, and a way to scam investors. Certainly the scamming the investors angle is one that regulators should be paying attention to. There's been several of these just in the last crypto bubble, for example. So yeah, it's a dream. It's not something that will ever happen, but it's a dream that's useful for getting people's money.
Yeah, I mean, for example, in Puerto Rico, we saw some policies that were put in place to try and entice more crypto people to come to the country and set up there. So, you know, you could have a certain amount tax-free if you put a certain amount of money into the economy, and whether or not those things actually happened is another matter. But how
that was an older law that the crypto guys were trying to use.
Yeah, and we've kind of seen a little bit of that replicated in Puerto Rico, right, Oscar? Like we've seen a lot of incentives put forward to try and entice more business to the region. I mean, even just the energy pitches. What have you seen of that adoption so far? That's to Oscar.
Could you please repeat the question again?
So, you know, over the last few years, we've seen some policies in Puerto Rico that were designed to entice people to the region. No, in Puerto Rico that we've seen to entice people to the region, and those are now kind of being replicated in El Salvador. We're seeing things put in place to try and get more businesses to set up there. You know, Tether's promising to fund part of the Bitcoin city, for example. Are these things actually working? Are we seeing crypto companies come to the country at all?
A few crypto companies have come to El Salvador, and according to themselves, they had an event a few weeks ago. They have generated 144 direct employments and around 450 indirect employment positions in El Salvador. Part of the problem also is that they expected to find, you know, highly skilled, qualified workers, you know, programmers that could code on the blockchain or something, but they couldn't find them. So what they need to do is basically create like a boot camp to train local resources into those kind of technologies. But at the moment they came, they couldn't find this qualified human resource, right? And another thing that I want to mention is that some of the other things that they wanted to achieve with this making of Bitcoin legal tender was to lower the cost of sending remittances, which hasn't been the case. I myself, I am an immigrant, and I've been sending remittances to family and friends for more than a decade. And now, you know, with the tools that the government gave us, it's become complicated, right? Because buying Bitcoin in the United States is a taxable event. Every time that you transfer Bitcoin from one, you know, let's say, exchange to your wallet, so you can send it to your family and friends in El Salvador, then you're being taxed, and the IRS has to know. So for any Salvadoran that is legally in the United States, that becomes a taxable event and is not practical. And for my compatriots that are in an irregular situation, it's even more difficult because they cannot fund their government wallet with their bank account as easy as other people can. Like they have to physically go to a Chivo ATM in a consulate location that sometimes is really far away from where they live. People has to drive 6 hours, 8 hours to reach the nearest consulate, and it's not a practical thing to do. And on the other hand, the consulates are open mostly between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., which are the times that we are working. So that's another use case that has failed because it's not practically, achievable. And in El Salvador, another thing that they wanted to do is to bank the unbanked, because in El Salvador, only like 30% of the population is banked. They have like a savings account or a debit card, but that hasn't been possible either. Or even the intention they had of cultivate the habit of savings. And the reason is that people doesn't have money to save. Like the minimum wage is $364 a month. You know, the people is really smart in that sense that they don't want to deal with Bitcoin's volatility, right? So if they receive $365 the day they were paid, they wanna stretch that money as much as they can. But if they turn into Bitcoin and there's a crash or something, then they will have less money. So most people is not using it. Like 61% of the people that download the government wallet back in September stopped using it. They just went after the gift bonus of $30, and then they spent it, and they decided not to use that anymore because of the volatility and the risk of losing their money.
And we'll kind of come back later to the issues surrounding the Chivo wallet and the arguments that are put forward as to why those are good initiatives for crypto utopias to put in place. But Molly, what's not being spoken about in this situation? Who's being left out of the equation here?
Yeah, well, I think David touched on it a little bit, that a lot of these crypto utopias are very much marketed towards the wealthy, crypto investors or people who already are fairly well off. And they paint, a very rosy picture of people living, in Pacific Islands and, not working too much and just sort of being on vacation all the time, and it sounds great. But I think they ignore a lot of the times the other people in this situation. So there's not much attention paid to, say, the people who are already living there, who might be displaced by the creation of, a Bitcoin city or a, magical island where all the crypto folks can go live. And there's also not much attention being paid to sort of the essential workers, the people who are cleaning the bathrooms and bringing the groceries and delivering the packages and collecting the trash. They often are just assumed to sort of exist in the periphery so that people don't have to deal with that. But there's not usually a plan for how they might be paid or, where they're getting their benefits from in these, unregulated tax-free zones. So, I think there's a lot to be worried about as far as what happens to everyone who is not the wealthy crypto investor in these scenarios. And I think, as people start to talk about these crypto utopias becoming more of the future of the world, which is what a lot of people are envisioning, we really have to worry about that. They seem to sort of explicitly aim to widen the divide between the wealthy and the poor. I also think that, that would raise questions about the well-being of the people who are working in those situations, especially if they were being sort of expected to be paid in crypto or to engage with the crypto ecosystem. It raises the question of whether or not people will be able to continue to opt out of engaging with crypto. I think in El Salvador, there's kind of a good example of people basically being required to accept Bitcoin as, entrepreneurs and things like that. And I think that's a little bit concerning, especially given the volatility and the risk involved with crypto that a lot of people would really rather not deal with. And, as far as employment goes, right now, when you accept a job, you're running the risk that, obviously a company could go under, you could be fired, there's all those kinds of risks. But with crypto, there's the added risk that, you could be doing fine, your company could be doing fine, but the token that you're being paid in could collapse. We've seen that in reality to sort of limited amounts with things like athletes accepting Bitcoin who, decided for often marketing reasons to accept their paychecks in crypto, in Bitcoin. And, the people who have decided to do that, often around the peaks of Bitcoin, are now seeing, 70% of their paycheck has just evaporated. I think in most cases, these are fairly well-paid athletes, and so they're probably doing okay. But, if we're living in a world where support workers and people who are living paycheck to paycheck are expected to be paid in and hold crypto, a lot of those people can't afford just losing 70% of their paycheck.
And I guess, David, that raises the question of what would it be like if this were to happen in a more developed society, like if, maybe not the US or the UK, but a country that has a higher GDP than somewhere like El Salvador.
So the UK is literally planning to do things like free ports up to charter cities. There was actually a plan to just declare that Hull was now a charter city and that certain rights and benefits would no longer be there, certain human rights, for example. So I wouldn't be so sanguine about that one. But that charter city plans are a common libertarian push. A lot of this is a sort of scam played on American libertarian investors, as I've mentioned before. But a lot of it has bad effects locally, where suddenly citizens in these areas are told, congratulations, you now lack a lot of your legal rights. We've done a special trick that means you don't have rights anymore. So this doesn't tend to work out very well, because it turns out that, like, the UK is there there's serious discussion of a general strike in the UK because the essential workers are so sick of being badly treated in the UK at the moment, and this is a rich country. So imagine how it's going to go in any poorer country, and that's without even crypto added.
Yeah, because I guess we had a session earlier today with David Columbia, who's written previously about the politics of Bitcoin. And I know that's something you wanted to speak about in this session because it's so intrinsically linked, I guess, the idea of the politics of crypto and building a crypto utopia.
So the utopia they plan to build, so Bitcoin started in extreme libertarianism, sincere libertarianism. These guys weren't scammers. I mean, the crooks came into Bitcoin later. It started with very, very sincere people who had certain economic ideas that didn't work. The gold standard, Austrian economics, and so on. We abandoned the gold standard because it didn't work. There's lots to question about the present system, but it's better than the system we had before it. But they think they want to go back to this, and that's why Bitcoin was constructed. And these ideas are endemic in cryptocurrency. They're still endemic to this day because the politics makes sense if you're a very rich guy who cannot see any worse threat than having someone tell you how you can handle your private money. Regulation is not to be tolerated, tax is not to be tolerated, that sort of thing. They really, really want to work around that. So they want to set up special zones in other countries where the essential workers can be assumed, I guess, and they can pay them pennies. I think that's the thinking. It's very naive thinking, so I don't want to oversimplify it too much, but I also don't want to come up with a version of it that makes more sense because it's a very stupid idea, right?
Yeah.
There's a thing with crypto ideas, you go, it can't be that stupid, and then you try to construct a sensible version of it, but actually the idea is just very silly and childish. The crypto utopian ideas are mostly childish. They're selling to people who don't know how anything works, who think that the idea of being crypto millionaires is great and they really like that idea and they want that, but they don't know how things actually work. And they don't know, say, how a society works, because society is regulations and governments, and the state is jackboot, the worst thing in the world. I mean, there's nothing wrong with pushing back on regulation. There's nothing wrong with freedom and liberty and so forth. But societies that work have a balance in them, and these guys don't do balance. They do extreme.
Because I guess one example of that would be in El Salvador, for example, they said that tourism was one of the biggest selling points of doing this. It would bring more money into the country, not just from businesses, but also crypto entrepreneurs wanting to visit the area. And Oscar, I know you went to see El Salvador's Bitcoin Beach, which was their famous tourism tout. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, actually, I had the chance to go to Bitcoin Beach multiple times along this year. I went before the Bitcoin Day when only a couple of Athena ATMs with the Athena branding were there. I return recently just to see how things are going 1 year later. Well, the government is publicizing that the tourism has been really good in the area, and you have to give credit to whom deserves it. And most of the tourism generated in the area is basically people that came with the curiosity to see how the Bitcoin phenomena started in El Salvador. And that made a lot of the local entrepreneurs in the area to expand maybe a hostel, with a couple of more rooms, or like add a couple of more tables to an existing restaurant, etc. But not all of them actually accept Bitcoin. Most of them accept Bitcoin, and this like influx of curious Bitcoiners and influencers, sometimes I will guess that motivated by, clicks and maybe video views, came to El Salvador and went to Bitcoin Beach and somehow helped the local economy, being tourists, wandering around, seeing how the things are going. But if you actually talk to the people, and you talk, for example, to a lady that owns a little bodega that sells, snacks and sodas and whatnot, she says that back in the day, like a year ago, she had $600 saved in Bitcoin, and now she has 1/3 of that. So she actually is like locked in, and she says, "Oh, but I haven't lost my money because I haven't withdrawn my Bitcoin into US dollars." So she has the hope that Bitcoin is gonna recover, and at some point she's gonna be able to get the money back. And if you see the infrastructure of the place, you still see like streets that are not paved. You still see really, really abandoned, public services. You see like open sewers, in some of the streets in El Zonte or El Tunco or Bitcoin Beach. Pollution has increased because of the influx of people. And some of the local entrepreneurs that have developed the area for the last decade, they are a little bit upset because all of these, changes that they've been exposed to. A couple of surf tournaments have been also developed in the area. That has been always a good place to surf. So they always had that influx of surf tourism. So it has been marginal, right? And it hasn't expanded to the rest of the country, right? So we haven't seen any concrete results, any big developments. Businesses are not saving money by accepting Bitcoin. Some of them have actually have to spend money to recur to third-party platforms to accept Bitcoin, like OpenNode, for example. So it hasn't worked for everybody.
And while it's kind of well publicized what a physical utopia is going like at the minute, crypto is obviously a digital product, a digital innovation. So you wouldn't have a physical utopia without a virtual one. Molly, what does these virtual utopias look like? I know there's quite a few. It's a spectrum.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It is a spectrum. So, a lot of people, when they hear the word metaverse, picture, people with VR headsets in the fully digital world where they're walking around and interacting in this sort of digital landscape. But, that the vision of the virtual utopia is quite broad. And in some cases, it's really used almost to refer to a sort of more extreme version of what people are already doing today, where a lot of what we do in our day-to-day is, online. A lot of people work remotely through their computers, they buy things online, they, communicate online. I think a lot of these virtual utopias are sort of based in the idea that everything will happen online and everything will be powered by crypto or blockchains in some way. Again, these often look sort of like paradise to the people who are, already working online a lot, tech workers, programmers, digital artists, but they don't necessarily consider the people who make those lifestyles possible. I've sort of read, day in the life of a, crypto person in, a decade or two. And, they talk about things like people taking one-off jobs, from online job boards, doing a couple hours of work, getting paid, and then spending the rest of their day with their family, which I think, everyone wants. But it ignores the idea of, who is putting up the internet connections and providing the groceries and taking care of the kids and all of those things. And it also ignores, I think, the infrastructure that would be necessary for life to move online to that extent and to move into crypto to that extent. The legal and financial infrastructure that would be required for people to be doing those kinds of jobs, in broad scale. A lot of these virtual utopias also start to talk about doing things like moving ownership of physical goods into the blockchain, which I think has kind of quite enormous ramifications if you start to think that through. So, when people start talking about, replacing traditional, say, real estate transactions with blockchain transactions, now your house deed is an NFT, and you can, it'll be so easy to buy and sell real estate because you'll just do a crypto transaction. You won't have to deal with those pesky lawyers or the, fees that are involved in getting your documents, handled. They sort of ignore the fact that the legal system is not prepared for that, or the existing systems of ownership can't really account for the fact that, what happens if someone steals your blockchain house NFT. We see NFT thefts multiple times a day. They usually don't involve people's physical living spaces, but, as we start to talk about, everything becoming crypto and blockchain, those are the types of things we'll need to account for. And I don't think, it's a system that is well suited to replacing, our entire system of realty, for example, or, the many other systems that people are talking about replacing with blockchain-based solutions. And then, I think finally you do need to really account for the fact that when people talk about moving everything over to being based in crypto, what they're really talking about is financializing everything. And so, everything that you do in your day-to-day will require you to hold crypto, to pay crypto in a lot of cases, and then be compensated potentially in crypto. What happens to the people who don't hold crypto or who can't afford crypto or who can't afford to pay to, even engage with these systems? Those just aren't, accounted for in these scenarios.
And the thing that I always like to think about as well is that the ethics of crypto, or like the pillars that these things are built on, is that this is almost like a rule-free environment, right? You're out of the scope of regulators, you're out of the scope of governments, and then that's everybody in the real world's worst nightmare. And so, David, I wonder if you could talk us through a little bit about, will regulators even be able to succeed in making rules for a virtual utopia? Is that possible?
Well, basically all the successful regulation of crypto has been where it touches the real world money system, because Bitcoin was supposed to be originally the cash. It would be the money. It would be the cash you use. It would have an economy and everything. That never worked out because it's terrible as currency. Structurally, it literally just doesn't work as currency. So it became just an investment product where cryptocurrencies are all derivatives of the dollar. So I think the thing about a lot of this stuff is it's a utopian dream to sell people on a bunch of cryptos in ways that it functionally constitute a lot of penny stock fraud, like unregistered penny stock offerings. The metaverse is whatever you want it to be. Like Web3 is not a term with a definition, and the only part of the assorted things called Web3 are NFTs, and they don't work as advertised either. It's just a crypto token with a piece of data in it that's probably a web page address or a picture of a monkey or something. Stuff doesn't exist. The metaverse idea that we'll live in a virtual world, this is often written up by tech journalists who forgot that Second Life existed and we had literally the same hype in 2006, 2008. Some of it was written up by the same journalists then that are writing about the metaverse now. And back then it was just like a virtual reality game that was companies were setting up offices in Second Life, that sort of thing. Eventually it fell by the wayside. It still has people who play Second Life because it's just a fun game, and it's sustainable now on a much smaller scale without the hype. So what they've done is they've done Second Life, but rubbish with a penny stock fraud attached. They do things like sell people on, a big one is virtual land. The market for this is to sell the idea of people that they'll be a digital landlord. So it's an investment scheme. You buy the digital land, the virtual land, you become a landlord in our virtual world, and renters never show up because there's literally no incentive. And there's no shortage of virtual land. You could start up another server of your own. None of these ideas make sense if you think about them for 30 seconds, but they sound really cool and they get a lot of hype. What you find is the people promoting these things, if you ask them, how does that actually work? Their ideas fall to pieces. There's a couple of famous podcast segments that went around, interview with Packy McCormick and another interview with Mark Andreessen, both from A16Z, asking, yes, but what's the Web3 use case? McCormick suggested the real estate one. You make a mortgage in NFT, and the other guy spent 8 minutes taking this idea apart. And then Packy said, look, I haven't really thought it through very closely. Like, he's literally the guy selling this stuff. And he brought up the example. Or Mark Andreessen, the A in A16Z, he was unable to explain what the use case was for a podcast for Web3. And he was talking to Tyler Cowen, who is a libertarian economist, basically on side with his politics, absolutely the most receptive audience. He just could not form a coherent case for it. And it's like, there isn't a coherent case, because what they're really selling you is cryptocurrencies, usually cryptocurrencies that would under US law probably constitute unregistered securities. That's the story doesn't have to make coherent sense. It just has to sound good enough to get people to put their money in. And that, I think, is something that regulators need to really, really look at, because if you start with the assumption it's all about the dollars, you'll basically be correct. At that point, you can look at how the scheme actually behaves. Ignore all the talk, the word blockchain, the word technology, the word Web3, metaverse, whatever. Look at the people in the flows of cash. Look at the structure of the scheme. This is not about software technology, it's about financial engineering in the sense of derivatives, complicated financial tools that leverage to other financial tools. And at the end of it, someone gets some dollars out the other end. And you look at the process of that and work out, is this actually legal? Because, we've got quite a lot of experience of regulating this stuff. That is the approach that I find is most useful in thinking about this stuff, because they've been pushing these dreams for most of a decade now. And the ideas don't change. The pitches don't change. Like, the metaverse pitch only works if you pretend that Second Life never happened. Otherwise, it would just be stupid. That sort of thing. None of this makes sense because it is actually not supposed to make coherent sense as an idea, because it's supposed to be just a pitch for selling you some crypto tokens in what would almost certainly be an unregistered offering of securities.
So there is a way that regulators are almost trying to get ahead of this with the building of central bank digital currencies, right? They're not cryptocurrencies, but they are digital versions of fiat currencies like the pound or the dollar. And I guess in a hypothetical situation, if these billions of dollars that are being plugged into Web3 at the minute do actually succeed, but regulators are successful in getting CBDCs into that environment rather than crypto, what do you think that looks like? Is that something that they could even achieve?
So CBDCs, as we know them, the current discussion in the last decade was directly inspired by Bitcoin, but it gets less and less like a Bitcoin or a blockchain or a crypto the more it goes on, the more closely it approaches reality, because central banks are not going to tolerate a money that flows around like big duffel bags full of $100 notes. They're just not. That's not a thing that's going to happen. But then the thing is, right, so it's cash, but it's worse. What's the use case? A lot of these things have floundered on having a use case. successful CBDCs need to have an actual consumer use case, and that doesn't work in countries that have pretty good digital money, like say Europe or East Asia. Or the digital money is really good. The commercial bank digital cash, it works nicely. America is somewhat behind because a lot of American consumer banking isn't very good. But for instance, Fed now is likely to come out before a Federal Reserve CBDC is, that sort of thing. CBDCs are just cash. It's run by an entity, doesn't even need to be a blockchain. So yeah, it's, if you start trading CBDCs in the metaverse, what does that actually mean? Do you mean a completely uncontrolled public blockchain currency that no one has a handle on? I mean, then it's a threat. And obviously central banks have to think about hypotheticals all the time. They have to think about wild hypotheticals because a central bank's job is stability. So they have to think about, what if we turn the whole world upside down? What are the consequences, you know? But the consequence of this one, I mean, don't design a CBDC that lets that happen would be the answer. Because what we're not really talking about some magical property of a metaverse, whatever that is. We're just talking about transactions happening out of sight, dark pools of liquidity, people swapping money out of the sight of regulators, which goes on all the time. That's called money laundering. It's the usual way to regulate that is when it touches real money again, then you have to think about it, and you can usually catch them. So that would be the approach to making sure that a proper handle is kept on that stuff, not letting large amounts of money be manipulated out of sight. Or
to get to like the narrow of that argument though, so it's one of the most popular narratives in crypto is the fact that, you know, it's supposedly meant to be saving people from financial tyranny. You know, in countries where there's lots of censorship, you could then use your money as you wish. I think one of the most famous examples most recently was the Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin saying that he used crypto as a means of donating to the Ukrainian causes without, you know, Russia having much oversight or being able to see that on his bank account details.
Sure.
Oscar, this is something that is obviously then put front and center with the physical utopias in these like third world countries, for example, where this is supposedly how crypto is going to save them. How has that worked out so far? Is there a lot of privacy-led solutions going on?
Yes, well, that's another thing that hasn't worked and probably won't work unless 100% of the transactions that the world is doing are in cryptocurrency. Because, and I'm going to stick to the data here, like hard data we actually have. Like, for example, the Salvadorean Chamber of Commerce found that only 14% of the country's merchants have ever made Bitcoin transactions since 1 year ago. Only 5% of them have been with the government wallet. Then half of the transactions made within the government wallet are in actual USD and not in Bitcoin. So basically, most of the remaining users of the government wallet, they are just speculating with Bitcoin, and they were probably people that were banked already, and for them it's easy to fund that wallet. That being said, I also want to mention that the remittances fell from 4.5% of the total received remittances back in October when we had this big marketing campaign to only 1.6% in July 2022. Now, with this basis of seeing that there are not much transactions happening with Bitcoin, and we want to, put it in the context of giving the people the liberty to transact their valuables without a tyrannical government, being aware of that, that doesn't work. And especially in El Salvador, where the most publicized solution is the government wallet, which fiat rails is a government bank. So basically, even the people that was promoting Bitcoin in El Salvador a year ago, they have recommended El Salvadorans to not use the government wallet if they want to be sovereign with their funds. Like, people has been recommending other solutions, like third-party solutions, like Mon Wallet, if I may mention one of those. So yeah, like basically, there's no way in El Salvador, as it's currently set up, for the government not to be aware of one's Bitcoin transactions, because even if you use one of these third parties, because the biggest chunk of the economy moves in USD, at some point you're gonna have to cash out from an ATM, for example, and for that you need some personal identification, like a phone number or an email or something like that, right? So it won't work basically, because people is expecting to receive US dollars as compensation for any goods or services. And if you wanted to use those goods or services to, go against a tyrannical government, it will be impossible because nobody is accepting Bitcoin, right? So it doesn't work in practice.
And digital identity is a really big topic in when we talk about these utopias, right? So, for example, on the one hand, you have crypto acolytes who really pride themselves on the ability to remain anonymous in these kind of environments, or even just pseudonymous, using an avatar and a fake name, and that's all you can know them as, and they can still do their job perfectly fine using that. But on the other hand, if we do have a version of a utopia where regulators have some sort of say, they're not going to let you get away with just having a pseudonym as your only kind of identifying moniker. Molly, how do you think these things are going to play out? If these kinds of situations come true where you have a job in the metaverse, you could have a portion of your household wealth in the metaverse. Is that all possible without some form of digital identity register?
Yeah, I mean, I think crypto developers have tried to tackle the identity problem to some extent. Crypto has really struggled with the identity problem so far. You hear about these projects where governance is all based on how many tokens you hold, which is a very sort of plutocratic model. And the reason that they do that is not necessarily because they think that's the best way to do it, but it's because they have a really hard time when everyone is anonymous, determining that one person is getting one vote. And so far, all of the attempts to tackle that problem have been very dystopian when they try to maintain the anonymity and the decentralized aspects of it. So, if you can't have a centralized record of everyone's identity, then these projects end up resorting to things like biometrics, where they are scanning people's irises, or, these huge webs of data collection where people are recording every person that they know, and events that they've attended, and the credentials that they hold, and their employment records, and what loans they've taken out, and try to reduce the likelihood that a single person is maintaining multiple identities in that way. Some of the systems end up looking a lot like sort of social credit systems, where people are able to say that that person's a bad person, you shouldn't trust them, and that is sort of the way that people are maintaining identity online. So I think a lot of these look really, really startling from those perspectives. But even those systems don't actually address the sort of regulatory aspects of things. They mostly deal with just determining that a person is not operating multiple wallets, but they have no, benefits from a know your customer standpoint, from an anti-money laundering standpoint. They're simply just handling the sort of uniqueness problem. Regardless, I think, of how this solution is implemented, if there is a decentralized version, then there's all those sort of aspects to contend with. If there's a centralized identity solution, there are similar risks around data exposure, I think, where suddenly all of your personal data is tied to your identity, which is being stored on these public blockchains. I think there's a huge amount of risk of putting that much data into one place, and especially, on these public chains where, things are fairly visible. There's also sort of a security risk, I think, associated with this around, everyone controlling their own security, and self-custodying both their cryptocurrency and their data. The average person is not technically adept to the level that would be required to actually self-custody something like that. Basically maintain their own security at the standards that currently banks are maintaining. And then I think finally another big risk with all of this is if you lose access to that identity. There are not great systems in place right now where if you forget your keys to your crypto wallet, or you lose your keys that you've written down somewhere, to restore access to that crypto wallet, which, some crypto people are willing to accept as a risk of doing business. They say it's your problem, it's your responsibility, deal with it. But in real life, people forget their passwords all the time. And most of the time, if you forget a password, it doesn't mean losing access to your life savings. It means talking to customer support, or, talking to your bank and regaining access. So I think the level of risk really that is being tied to cryptocurrencies and blockchains, and to the identity solutions that are being implemented is absolutely mind-boggling. And I feel like none of the solutions that we've seen proposed, centralized, decentralized, any of them, adequately address those concerns.
So we'll take a break at this point.
Sorry, guys, it seems like my internet's frozen. I can't see you at all.
Oh, we can see and hear you.
Yep, can see and hear you fine.
Oh, okay, you're coming back now. Hang on. Hopefully Stephen can edit this.
We were at 45 minutes. Is it
I'll
going to
edit
drop the
that
call?
out.
Okay, I was gonna use Molly as the end. So I will just, if you guys can see me, I will do an end bit. I think you're coming back now slightly.
1, 2, 1,
is
2.
that okay? Is that all right, Stephen, if I just do a wrap up section and then you can edit out me looking really confused?
That's all fine. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, I mean, and to that point, I guess that really sums up why, in the future, if crypto utopias really do exist, we will kind of have a bit of a situation on our hands where the data regulators might be the ones that are in control of our lives in future. Them and the financial regulators will have to, share power, but those will be the top two dogs. Well, thank you everyone for joining me. This was a really interesting conversation. I hope you all really enjoyed listening, and stick around for the rest of the conference tomorrow. And then that's it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, for some reason my computer just absolutely went AWOL while Molly was speaking.
You can watch it in the recording, I suppose.
Yeah, you'll see my eyes just go.